Hi, and welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book.
And then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we will be continuing our discussion of Stephen King's 1986 big-ass horror novel, It. Now let's get to the Barons. Alright, so chapter 10 comes next in part 3. We get Bill. He's in a hotel room in Derry. He's got Mike Hanlon on the phone, and they're arranging like a get-together, a reunion. Mike shares that Stanley is dead, but doesn't elaborate on the details. And they all head down to this restaurant, and they get a private room at this restaurant for their reunion. And during the cab ride over, he gets in with this little character named Dave, who keeps saying, "Pardon my French if you're a religious man," every time he curses, which is quite frequently, which I just thought was a really interesting little tick he gave this fairly throwaway character.
I thought it was great. Yeah, I want to start saying this within the podcast now. Anytime that you curse, I'm going to try to catch you with it. I'm going to try to say, Pardon your French if you're a religious man. I guess I have to say it for myself.
Yeah, just anytime either of us curses now, we need to say that. It's just a quick 8 words.
It works for the audience too. I feel like the audience will appreciate that.
That's right. It gives them a little heads up.
We might be able to take our explicit tag off our podcast.
So he rides through the town with Dave, who keeps pardoning his French. And he sees all the changes that Derry has undergone. He sees places that have been torn down and replaced with new buildings. Seems like there's been a lot of growth, but there is a few places that still stand that he remembers from being a kid, like the standpipe, the canal, that sort of thing. And finally, they arrive at the restaurant, heads in. And we get the first meeting of the Losers Club as adults.
And heading in, Bill had this moment that I thought was really cool that Stephen King threaded in, where he didn't know that he wanted to see all of his childhood friends grown up. He knew that he's been balding, and he's kind of everybody kind of gets, they get old, they get bigger, and he's gotten to that point, and he didn't want to see his friends not in their perfect states. And then as he walks through the threshold, for some magical reason, he sees them all as children again, as he remembers them for a slight second, and before he sees them for who they actually are.
Yeah, King's blurring the lines between something actually magical happening and then a moment that just seems kind of magical. And it's that nice kind of ambiguity where it's kind of up to you to decide whether or not there is something magical at play in this moment. Let's see, they reconnect and start telling each other what's been going on with their lives. They talk about their successes and, who's gotten married and so forth. Richie makes everyone laugh doing some voices, and they all start drinking some alcohol.
Some more ill-advised voices.
Yeah.
A couple, I think, right?
It's like they're a little better, but not much. It seems like they have a little bit more of a professional shine on them, but it's also stuff that it flew in the 80s, but I think today would be considered pretty offensive, for good reason. And then we get Ben, who tells the story of how he got skinny, and that's kind of everyone's curious about that. Someone says he looks like a model now, and he tells the story of when he was a kid, after the events of the novel, after they defeated It the first time. He remembers some boys doing something that he calls fat paddling, where they were slapping his stomach and beating him, and then he runs, and the gym coach kind of catches them, tells them all to leave, basically tells Ben to shut up, body shames him. And then Ben gets pissed and says, you know what, I'm going to come back and I'm going to run track and I'm going to beat your fastest person. And, he has this kind of confrontation with the coach, and the coach doesn't know what to make of him and kind of says, all right, kid, whatever you want. But the coach is a real asshole. And then we find out that he does that. He starts running, he starts eating salad, and then he comes back, wins a race, and gets punched by the coach.
I think it's crazy that in the 50s that adults were this outwardly abusive towards kids.
Yeah.
Ben goes through some stuff, and I've said it over and over, but this guy's a badass, like through and through. He pushes through adversity. He's just like such a likable, relatable character. Like he has a lot of issues, and every single time he stands up to whatever comes through.
This reminds me of something that I wanted to try and see if I can put to words. I was thinking about this novel and how a lot of people say this is Stephen King's like coming of age tale. And I think that holds true. It really is. But more than that, I think this novel is about looking at all the adult, quote-unquote, things that children have to deal with that their parents don't know about. Like the secret lives of children and all the like terrible parts of the world that it's like often the worst of humanity that children often face, whether that's abuse from their own parents or neglect or bullies. And when you're a kid, you don't have any of your maturity or intelligence or experience that you have as an adult to like handle these things. So not only are you experiencing some of the worst parts of humanity, but you also aren't equipped to deal with it. And I think this novel really does a great job of exploring that.
The adults are cruel, but just think of kids at that age. Like kids being cruel to kids is like a very common thing, and they're the most cruel people. They don't understand social norms or boundaries yet. They just like they learn certain things that are hurtful, and they see that they can be, I guess, powerful in those situations when they're less powerful in more adult situations, and they take it out on each other, and it can be pretty vicious with kids. And I think he definitely highlights that, as well as the fact that and that's something that parents, they're like, oh, kids get picked on and stuff, but they don't think about how vicious it can be and how like life changing and it can set you down a path almost. So I think it's cool that King is really going and showing, like you're saying, like it's like the unseen world of kids, that they have to deal with these things that people just kind of assume it's something that everybody goes through.
A lot of people forget, I think, about their own struggles as children and assume that life is really easy for children. Like it's like a lot of people don't think about that stuff now, and I think he's trying to highlight it. But since this section's focusing on the adults, that's the other part of this novel that I think is just as important. I think it's a lot about how our past defines us, in a way, like defines who we are as adults, how we carry a lot of our trauma with us, and about, I don't know, as someone who lives really far away from where I grew up, I can really identify with the idea of going back to a place that you grew up in and kind of reverting or almost becoming younger in your mind. Like you kind of go back to being a kid a little bit, and it's weird in like weird ways. And it's being faced with everything that you remember from your childhood. And I think we're getting that through all the characters and each in their own way.
And I like that you said that this is one of Stephen King's coming-of-age stories, and I think that those are some timeless stories like this. When we first started reading this novel, I got ideas of, Stephen King's Stand By Me, and I got ideas of The Goonies is one for me that, like, it really makes me think of these kids kind of like scrappy kids coming together to defeat something or deal with, like, an adult situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think pop culture, his fingerprints are on pop culture. Between him and Steven Spielberg and The Goonies, a lot of these like children in the 80s stories, when we think of them, we're thinking of King's work and that kind of stuff. And like, a show like Stranger Things that's out right now, obviously leans heavily on Stephen King. Like it kind of wears it on its sleeve that's a big inspiration. They even like name drop a couple Stephen King, or at least one Stephen King story in the first season. Anyway, let's get back to it. Mike reveals that Stan killed himself and how. And everyone kind of is shocked by it, but Bill says that he thinks that Stan decided to die and stay clean rather than live and get dirty, because he remembers him being this like fastidious, always wanting everything orderly child, and I guess that's how he's explaining why he thinks he understands why Stan couldn't come back.
I think it's interesting that Stan isn't there as an adult, and for the points that you're making there, he doesn't think that he can handle it. So he just thinks that it's more orderly and it's something that's in his control to kill himself, right?
Right.
So he decides to kill himself because it's something within his control. It's something that he can keep orderly. And yet it's because of the fact that he couldn't deal with going back and not having control over situations, especially as an adult. He was going back into situations where he'd be dealing with things that he couldn't control as a kid, and he would still have as much control over the situation, which is none.
Yeah, I was brought back to the part where Stan has told his story about the standpipe, and he mentions that it's like an affront to the natural order. Like he has this moment where it's like he can't bear how crazy it all is. And that to me was the like King laying the groundwork for why Stan kills himself. He essentially just can't handle a world in which magic is real and there's monsters and all the neat, orderly things that he takes comfort in, like, fall apart. Anyway, so Mike tells them that the murders have started again. And he tells them about Adrian Mellon. He starts listing off children who have died in different brutal ways. He mentions the Bradley gang, which we find out more about later. He talks about animal mutilations, lynchings. These are all things that happened in the past. Loggers dead in a cabin. On and on. He's done a lot of research, and he's found that crime escalates every 27 years or so. And he thinks that over time it's been getting worse as Derry kind of grows in population. But he does say that last time in 1958, somehow they halted it before it could like finish its course, which usually ends in some sort of big catastrophe, we've heard. But none of them can still remember what they did, although Mike seems to remember at least most of it. But he doesn't share it. He kind of wants them to come about it naturally on their own. And he ends by showing them a picture of Georgie that was found recently on a new victim's body. And he shows that to Bill, and kind of it chills everybody. And he mentions they arrested Hermit for the murders. Oh, and I did want to talk about this. The hermit says that he saw lights in the woods. And then they find out that the final fifth grader had been ripped apart, and the words "come home, come home, come home" were written in blood.
I think that it is pulling them back. The picture of Georgie, the "come home, come home, come home." I think that it's just it pulling them back. He knew that they would always come back. He knew that he was I think that he had influence over Mike and what Mike was able to hear and the things that he was able to like find. I think that it was manipulating him into eventually coming to the conclusion that he needed to bring them back because somehow they defeated it and he felt cheated, and he needs them to come back because he has to finish what he started, basically. A couple points I was thinking about, all of those things that Mike was referencing, the logging, the Bradley gang, these are all things that I assume reading through that will become clear as we read more into the interlude. Like more of the interludes obviously will be like kind of encompassing what those things that he just mentioned. Something else that we didn't talk about is that Mike made the point that there were 7 of them before and they made some sort of circle.
That's
right.
And
at this time, without Stan, they were going to need to make a smaller circle. So there's some sort of ritual, and I'm assuming the turtle has something to do with it. Eventually, we're going to find out.
Yeah. I think we'll talk more about the turtle at the end, because we have a bit of feedback about the turtle. We'll save that. That's a good point. They do say that Mike says that he doesn't even know if this thing's going to work now, because they're not all there. And so it throws it into kind of doubt. Like, we immediately feel like, oh, we're down a man. This is now got a less of a shot of working than it did before. We learned that each of the Losers Club is actually quite well off as an adult. Is this something, by the way, I wanted to ask you, is this something that crossed through your mind?
Yeah, I think when they were talking about this, and also we're going to get to the infertility in a second.
Yeah.
The fact that they were all rich, I feel like that had something to do with, like, they bested this thing when they were kids, and they deserve some sort of compensation from the natural order of the universe or something. Like, they had to deal with this awful evil, and it was just like, because of that, they all ended up being well off because they kind of deserved it or something. I'm not really sure what to make of that, but I definitely thought it was interesting.
I think that any read is valid here. My read, I think, was that they learned a lot of valuable lessons about standing up to evil and kind of not taking no for an answer, and maybe he's making a point about how those lessons helped them to be effective in the like world of getting money. Mm-hmm. But we also got like a hint that there was a lot of luck involved with some of it, so maybe it's like a combination of the two. They became like really go-getters, and then also they got really lucky. But yeah, we do also learn that they all seem to have some sort of infertility, and that they can't have children. None of them have children.
I think that has something to do with it. Like, I think the infertility thing is less the cosmic order or whatever. I think it is making it so that they didn't have any, because if they had kids, they wouldn't go back to Derry, right?
Right. Probably not. One last thing for this part. Mike mentions almost everything, but it says he can't remember it all. And then he mentions the deadlights, which makes Bill like jump and have like goose flesh on his arms. What'd you think of that?
So it was the deadlights, you said?
Yeah, the deadlights.
I don't know what to make of it. I know that it's something that will show back up. So say, like, kind of talk more about it, and then I'll kind of, because I'm trying to remember which part you're talking about exactly.
Yeah, so Mike, I forget exactly how he says it. I think he's rattling off things that he remembers, and he says something like, I remember something about deadlights, and Bill just like has this like really strong reaction to the word. It made me think about what we had just heard with the hermit that got arrested, who had mentioned that he saw lights floating in the woods. So I know a little bit more about the deadlights, so I don't want to like do a lot of speculation.
I knew, like, when I read it, I was like, that's a thing. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know that there's the specific thing that I can point to as to what that would be. It's related, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'd say keep your eye on it. I do have a little bit more I want to talk about later with regards to them, so we'll get into it. Mike says that he thinks everyone will eventually remember everything. They did something and nobody can remember what exactly it was. And then we get the first time that someone says beep beep Richie to Richie. It was like this thing that they'd forgotten. I'm amazed at how far along into this novel we get before we hear the words beep beep Richie. And there's a few things like that I thought were like throughout the entire novel, but we don't get until almost the midpoint now.
Yeah, I thought that was funny, like a cool little, like, that's something within a group of somebody who's annoying you. That would be a natural progression to be like, just come on, shut up. We don't want to hear it anymore. We know that it's a coping mechanism, or it's something that you do to be funny, but
it's like letting him know he's gone a little too far to like dial it back. Yeah, and they take a vote, and all unanimously vote that they're going to stay and they're going to try and kill it.
Oh, another thing is each of them they're telling stories, and when they're telling about their fertility, they talk about how some of them have tried and that kind of thing. And Richie has this vasectomy story where the odds of his he had a vasectomy, and the odds of it healing itself, there's like sometimes it just
like pretty astronomical, right?
Yeah, there's like insane odds of it happening, and it healed on its own.
Yeah.
And then come to find out, he had thought that he had a vasectomy, and he was having sex with all these women, and none of them ever became pregnant, without protection, and none of them ever became pregnant, even though the vasectomy healed itself. So I think that's more of just, it's black magic.
Yeah.
He's kind of just like blocking any sort of thing that will deter them from coming back in the future.
So next up, they all decide it's time to split up and wander through town. But then at the end of the dinner, they decide they're going to open up their fortune cookies, right? Richie also begins to tell a story, but then he says, no, that was a dream. And he claims that he never actually encountered it before, that he's the only one who didn't. But we kind of get a sense that maybe that's not true. But we don't get the story here. And then, yeah, they all get their fortune cookies, and I got a quick list. Blood spurts out of Bev's. A bug comes out of Eddie's. Richie sees a human eye in his. Ben's is, like, got dislodged teeth in there. Bill's starts to, like, bulge and, like, beat, like a beating heart almost, and it's like something alive is in there. And the waitress comes in, and Bill kind of tells everyone to, like, basically be cool. And they all kind of act like nothing's going on, and it's clear that she can't see any of this. But she leaves, and then Bill's cracks open, and a big gray fly comes out, and he mentions that he had just seen the movie The Fly, and that it scared him, and he thinks that's why. So it's, again, kind of a moment where they're talking about how it is preying on their fears.
Yeah, each of them, it's like they're kids again, and each of their fears is showing back up. I was kind of bummed that Bill Denbrough doesn't like The Fly. He said something, he kind of trashed. He kind of said, like, oh, it was a kind of, he was like, it was an all right movie, but it kind of stuck with me.
I bet that's King's opinion.
I know. Come on, Stephen King. You don't like David Cronenberg's, like, The Fly? It's such a classic. Like, that's a big movie. Like, that's a big one too. Especially a genre guy like Stephen King not liking The Fly kind of surprised me.
Isn't that Jeff Goldblum?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's got a young Jeff Goldblum. What more could you want?
Exactly.
So yeah, they decide they're all going to go and wander off alone and walk through the town. And I do like that King lampshades this by saying, like, this is clearly a bad idea, and some of us might even die doing it. But he, like, also Mike feels like we have to do it, and they all feel like it's some part of it. So to me, he's just lampshading it, but it feels to me a little bit like a contrivance to get them all out on their own. But it works. I just am willing to be like, okay, I guess they have to do this. Did it bother you at all?
I thought it was weird to have them, because I think Bev is the one who's like, wait, why are we splitting up? And I was like, exactly, why are you splitting up?
Why would you ever do that?
If there's certain things that you guys need to go see them as a group. You guys did that when you were kids, and the whole point of you guys being in a group all the time when you were kids is to kind of combat the fact that there's a crazy killer demon clown thing. But I mean, I did like getting them on their own. The thing with
the sections were good, but the getting them there was a little, like, odd. It was just kind of like Mike going, this is part of it, and then they're all like, okay.
Well, I feel like there's a lot of that going on. Like, Mike just, like, throughout the rest of this part here that we're going to be talking about, we get Mike, and he just keeps repeatedly being like, yeah, this is just the way it goes, or I just knew that this was going to happen, and he just seems to be like this clairvoyant being now, instead of being like some kid that stayed behind a dare. And I know he does a lot of reading, and he knows the town history and that kind of thing.
So the first walk we get is Ben. He's out walking through town aimlessly. He doesn't know where he's going. He remembers using silver dollars for something. He remembers the word chud, or should. And he sees... he kind of has a vision of a turtle. It's very weird. And it's very brief. But he just has this momentary thought of a turtle. And then he arrives at the library, which he has this moment of standing out and looking at the tunnel that essentially connected the two parts of the building, and thinking about it and from, like, an architectural point of view, and just how, like, beautiful it is, and the way it, like, shines against the background. And he kind of has it's like a moment of, like, an architect looking at a building and really appreciating it for its design. And then we get what I would call, like, a love letter to a library description from Stephen King when he describes this thing. And you can tell that this is someone who's spent a lot of time in a library and really thinks they're kind of a magical place. And then we get Billy Goat's gruff being told again to the children, the exact same story from his previous flashback about a troll under a bridge. And we get a I think King is making a point here about this little story being pretty important to what we're reading.
I like that Ben's character, I like that the library is such an important facet of his character, and that, like you were saying, I like that King kind of puts, it almost feels like every single one of his characters, or his main characters at least, he's putting a piece of himself into them. Like Ben has, like obviously Bill would probably be the closest to him, but it seems like every character has something, and I think a lot of authors, you could probably speak to that. I don't know, do you feel like that's something that you do? Put yourself into the characters?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to do that, because you're creating a person, and you're drawing on your own life experiences to do that, and so it's almost impossible to not do that, especially if you want to do it well. So yeah, I think every character any author has ever written, even the bad ones, a little piece of them is in there. Something authentic is what goes into that character, and is the kind of character is built around that.
So it's just like a characteristic or a trait, or obviously in Bill's case it'd be more than that. It kind of seems like that would be almost like a 1-for-1.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's 1-for-1, but it's I think with Bill it's the more unusual thing that it's like identifiable descriptors. Like we can say he's a writer, he's, you know what I mean, this and that, A, B, and C are all the same as King. But for a lot of characters, it's not going to be that. It's just going to be minor things, some way of looking at the world, something that like maybe even you don't do it all the time, but you've done before. And you could be basing it off of someone you've met, but you often have to understand it well enough to get in their head that there's normally a piece of it. And it's weird because like it sounds like I'm trying to say that like all writers are like secretly evil and and can have all these really terrible things, but I think it's more mundane than that. It's more about the humanity and the recognizable human things in every one of these characters that you latch onto often comes from a really genuine place, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. You can see it in a lot of, like, I feel like the issue comes when people will read a book and they'll just assume that it's the author. And so if the like in Richie's case, if people will get offended by Richie doing like blatantly racist voices and things like that, it's not King. Like the King isn't saying that's how he feels. You know what I mean? But
yeah.
Like they will thread in, like in most situations, I feel like you can kind of see where an author will like favor a character and they'll find themselves closer to that character, and you can kind of see characteristics that they thread into it. Could, like, in your mind you can draw parallels to them as a person.
Yeah, it's a really messy thing to get into, honestly, because there is a lot of weird overlap. But I agree, just because a character does something doesn't mean that the author like is like co-signing that he thinks it's okay. It's more just that that's something that the author is aware of and is using in his story.
So yeah, I like that Ben's character, like the kind of the thing that they keep going back to is that he created this BBC building, and it's like one of the facets of the BBC building he copied from the library that he loves so much. So I think it's cool that his success is owed to the fact that he was in that library a lot, and it like comes from, and I think that's just a cool way to build a character, to show the progression of this happened, so then this happened. So he was at the library a lot and he enjoyed this section of it, and so he was successful later because he replicated it in a bigger sense for this BBC building, and nobody sees the connection except for like Mike and a few others.
Yeah, that's a good observation. I like that. So in the library, he gets a library card. He interacts with a young librarian, and Pennywise shows up on top of some of the bookshelves and starts yelling at him and like trying to draw attention, and like no one else can hear him, only Ben can. And he's holding balloons in one hand and a book in the other, and he says he's got a book for him, and he's basically just like taunting him and calling him fat and all this stuff. And then he starts to turn into Dracula and bite his own lips off. He asks Ben what Stan saw before he died. And he kind of hints that maybe he showed Stan something. Now, do you think that that's Pennywise just taking credit for something, or do you think that actually happened, that he somehow showed Stan something?
If I had to guess, I would think that it was Pennywise taking credit for it.
Yeah,
but he could have had some influence. We're not sure. Obviously, it's kind of ambiguous. But I the way I saw it was he was kind of just taking it, because Stan was the guy who wanted to take it into his own hands, so he took his own life, and like I don't know, maybe he was pushed into that.
Yeah, he kind of does the same thing when he talks about how the old librarian died. He said that Ben learns that she had a stroke, and he says, "Oh, that was me," And so we don't know like if that's true or if he's just taking credit for all these things to make himself seem even more powerful than he already is.
Yeah, in this section we start to get like we get a lot more Pennywise, and I think it's cool because before he was kind of this like shadowy figure that was doing things in the background. Now we're getting them face to face with the characters, and the first time that we're seeing them talk to Pennywise is as adults. So we haven't seen their encounters as kids, because he knows them. Obviously, he knows them each individually from their first encounters, and then whatever happened that we don't know yet when they were kids. So something that I like is that they have to keep up appearances, and like Pennywise is like egging them on and kind of taunting them because he's in the library and he's like, shh.
Yeah, he can't let on.
He's shouting. Pennywise is shouting at him and stuff in a library where everybody's silent. And Ben is struggling with the fact that he wants to scream back, but everybody will think he's a psycho because nobody else can hear Pennywise. And the same thing happened with the waitress when they were at that restaurant with the fortune cookies. They all had to, even though there was like blood gushing out of the fortune cookies and flies were coming out of the fortune cookies, they all, when the waitress was coming back, they all had to like act like nothing happened. And that Eddie was just having an asthma attack that he cured with his inhaler.
Right. So this section ends with him realizing that the book he's been holding all along, that he didn't even know, is the same book he took out on the day he was originally attacked by Henry Bowers and got the H carved into his stomach. And it's even got like a boot print on it and stuff. It's like the same library book that he checked out. So it's linking, Pennywise is linking the present to the past. And we I don't know, I felt like it was something to do with Pennywise, but maybe it's some other force. I don't know. What did you make of him having that book?
I thought it was Pennywise messing with him. I think that the book was left behind. We don't know how it was returned to the library. Maybe Pennywise dropped it in the drop box, in the return box. And I could just see Pennywise the clown returning a book at the library. But I think that maybe he was taunting him again. He was like, remember when you were a kid and I would terrify you, make sure you still remember that kind of thing. Yeah. By giving him the same book.
So that's the end of Ben's little section there, and then we get on to Eddie, who is also similarly walking. He's just kind of walking through neighborhoods, and he sees all these old houses, and he remembers playing at them. And he arrives at this field that he remembers playing baseball in. And I have written here just how struck I was with King's eye/ear/nose for evocative details, and his ability to create a world that feels lived in. And it feels so, like when he's describing all this stuff, I was amazed at how much it just transported me to that place. And I noticed that he had, now this is kind of a writer thing, but it's something that stood out to me. He would often give a detail and then give like a qualifier about that detail, whereas I think a lot of other writers wouldn't do that. So my example is, he mentions that Eddie sees all this glittering broken glass from smashed beer bottles and Coke bottles. And he could have just stopped there. You see the detail. But then he says, in the old days, such things were religiously removed. And that second qualifier is like the character perceives a detail, and then King adds that second sentence to get the character is reacting and thinking about what he's seeing. And that is something that, to me, I was quite impressed with, because it works on multiple levels in evoking the character and making that detail really work and sing in a way that it wouldn't if it was just on its own. Otherwise, it's just like I'm listing off things. This is what he sees. And instead, we know something more about the scene.
Like you're saying, I think the broken glass was interesting specifically for the fact that it was Eddie that saw the broken glass with it, right? Pennywise, yeah. The homeless Pennywise.
When he took on the guise of the homeless,
right?
Man.
He was underneath the house. There was like glass and stuff. So yeah, but the detail that he brings is just it's masterful. It's crazy. Like you're saying, he takes these details and then he puts them into context so that only a character. So it's an experience that a character's had, and that's why it's so precise, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, I definitely can appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that's interesting for more people than just writers. But as a writer, I thought that was really, really, like, I was taking notes and going like, remember to do this, because it's impressive stuff. So then we get Eddie remembering that Belch Huggins used to play baseball there, and he was pretty dumb but mean. And I think dumb but mean is a really good description of a lot of King's like more villainous characters. There's so many dumb, mean characters in his books, and especially this book, because you can kind of describe all of them, all the bullies that way. And yeah, so we find that Belch hit a homer, basically hit it over the fence, hit it so hard that the ball unraveled, and then Eddie gets to the fence, looks down into the barrens, starts thinking about being a kid and playing baseball there, when all of a sudden he just like catches something gets thrown at him, and he looks up and he sees it, and it's basically a mix between Belch Huggins, the leper from underneath the house on Niebalt Street, and Pennywise. And he's wearing a baseball uniform. So it's kind of a lot going on there, but it's really interesting because it's like all these like zombified spirits start to come up, and like one even bursts out of the ground like a gopher, and they all start coming towards him, and it comes up to the fence and starts climbing over it, and he just is like running away. And one thing I thought was really interesting detail is that at one point the thing that is climbing over the fence just like winks out of existence, and he hears this loud popping sound as the air, it's described, the air like closing in to where this thing used to be, which I think is another good sign that what's happening isn't something he's purely imagining. There actually does take up like a physical, it takes up space in the world.
Pennywise is like this really interesting creature because he's this clown, and he keeps talking about how, and I think in Bev's chapter we get a little more on it, but he keeps talking about how he has different names. And I think it's interesting because he seems like this supernatural being, but I think that there's like subtext of like some sort of history that he was like, maybe he was killed in like an awful way, and that's why he haunts this area or something like that. I don't think it's that specific, but when they talked about him popping out of existence and the air filling that section that he was in, I think that that's like his way of saying like, this isn't just like something that people, he's not just giving them visions. There's like something that's physically like there, and it's dangerous, and eventually they'll have to deal with it.
Now, I don't know if I made this connection the first time, but did you think at all about how like a balloon, when popped, essentially we hear the sound of the air like escaping, and that how the description of it popping out of existence was very similar to a balloon?
I didn't make that connection. That's interesting to think about, though. That's cool. That's like, because he's leaving these balloons behind that keep popping for each of the characters in the walk. Like I think with Ben, we got a balloon that spun around and it said like, I killed the librarian. The one that's left behind for Eddie says something about how his inhaler, his asthmatic medication is going to give him cancer.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it gives cancer. That's true.
So I don't know. I like the idea that it was like that, a balloon noise, though. That's cool. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. I have a theory about that, but I don't want to, because I can't help but use some of the knowledge I have from having read this book before. So I don't want to like put words to it in case that's something that you would come across naturally. We'll see. Maybe in the next episode I'll talk about it. So next, so Eddie runs away and escapes. And then next we get Bev. And this is a really this is a part that stands out in my memory of this book, this section right here. And there's like a few, like really just parts that I like feel like I'll never forget. And this is one of them. So she goes to her father's, or what she thinks might be her father's place. She doesn't know for sure that if he is there, 'cause she hasn't talked to him in years. And she sees what she thinks is the name Marsh, and goes up and kind of knocks at the door, or rings the doorbell, and an old woman opens it up, and she says, oh, she realizes that it wasn't actually Marsh, it was something else. And the old woman tells her a story about how her father's been dead for 5 years, invites her in for tea, and she goes in, and Bev starts to look around the house. The woman says it's fine, and she goes into the bathroom, or it's an apartment, I think, not a house, but regardless. She sees the bathroom where the blood sprayed out as a kid, And then she comes back out and starts talking with the woman again, and she starts to focus on how the woman's teeth are like crooked and like really like strangely white. And then as she's looking at the woman, she starts to look older. And the woman mentions in a story that her father was someone named Robert Gray, and we find out basically that that's Pennywise. And because he had said that before, I think.
He said I think in the very beginning of the book, when he introduced himself to Georgie, he said that Bob Gray or Robert Gray was one of his other names.
Yeah. So I don't know what to make of that really here, but yeah, we do get a connection that she's kind of claiming that that's her father. And this woman kind of transforms into a witch before Bev's eyes. And everything starts to like just go crazy. Like the table turns to like fudge, and she starts to get this like feeling like she's in a gingerbread house. Also, she realizes that her teacup is full of shit, and she's been like sipping at it. And all of a sudden, the witch transforms into her father and starts like making all these like really creepy, pedophilic, sexual statements at her. And it's just like a terrifying scene to me that is really like also like insane. Like it takes you and it puts you in a moment where you can't get a ground, like you can't be like, you're like, what's real? What's even happening here? And she runs out and almost gets hit by a car, and she gets across the street and kind of looks back and sees that everything kind of looks normal again. And she even wonders, like, did she even go in? Like, or was that all something that just kind of happened in her mind? And then, again, she sees a balloon at the end of this section.
I thought this was cool because they were bringing up the old fairy tale. The whole house was turning into, like, the candy land area or whatever from the Hansel and Gretel story. And she talked about how she feared, like, that was the story that, like, scared her as a child. And so he knows such an immense amount of their fears that it makes me think that, like, he's like, because it's probably stuff that they've never voiced, it's just stuff that they've thought about, so he's in their heads, he knows their thoughts, which could potentially stop. If he knows their thoughts, that means that if they try to stop him in certain ways, maybe he will be able to, like, preemptively stop them from doing that because he knows. I'm not really sure how, like, logistically how that works out.
In the previous section with Ben, there's a moment where Ben thinks something at Pennywise, and then Pennywise responds to it.
Because Ben couldn't speak out loud, yeah.
Yeah, so we've had proof that he can literally read their minds.
Right, which is even more terrifying.
Yeah.
So Pennywise was this witch. That's how I was reading into it. And there was like a chest in the house that had the initials. What was it? Bob. What was the last name? Gray. So it'd be BG. Yeah. I believe it had the initials BG on it. So, like I was saying before, there's like, I think there's some sort of story with Pennywise having been an actual character. And if Pennywise was the witch, the witch kept saying that her father was Bob Gray. So it was Bob Gray, Pennywise's father, and he's like taking on this persona of like a clown because that was like what his dad was, and his dad mistreated him or something, and now he's haunting this area. I think that there's like things that King is adding to try to build like a back story for Pennywise.
There does seem to be something special about this name, but we also have to remember that by all accounts from Mike's history, that it is like really, really old, possibly even predating Derry. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's like how do those two things line up? Is like an open question. All right. So next we get Richie, and he goes to the Paul Bunyan statue on his block, and he sits down at it, and he remembers running into a mall to get away from the three bullies. And he remembers kind of giving him the slip and like making him think that he went out this door. And then he remembers as a kid he walked out and sat down in front of this Paul Bunyan statue and had this moment where the statue turns and looks at him, and then he like just barely jumps off of the like bench before the big axe that Paul Bunyan is wielding starts like crashing into the ground after him. And essentially the giant chased him, trying to like chop him in half with his giant axe. And then all of a sudden, like, everything returned to normal, and like the park bench wasn't cut up or anything. And so this is what Richie has convinced himself was a dream, because kid Richie saw that everything was back to normal and thought, well, okay, well, I just imagined that.
This is like Richie was trying to cover up the fact that he had encountered Pennywise just like all the other kids before, and when he goes back to the statue, he encounters it again, and then I think it's in his mind it's now confirmed that was not a dream.
Yeah, because I mean that's what happens as an adult. He looks up, and instead of a statue of Paul Bunyan, now it's a statue of Pennywise.
Something really interesting from this section that you actually mentioned before was Pennywise's powers seem like limitless at sometimes, and we've talked about how he can read minds. And in order to get away this time without realizing it, Richie again uses one of those, I think it was a really racist voice this time again, but he uses it to distract.
Yeah.
He uses it to distract Pennywise, and Pennywise takes offense to it. Not offense because it's a racially provoked thing, but offense to it because it's like he's making fun of him a little bit.
He's standing up to him, and yeah.
So, and then after that happens, Pennywise gets a little angrier than we've seen him towards the kids because he's been messing with them up until now. And he starts talking about how he can give Richie different kinds of cancer and how he can give him a heart attack and all of these things. And then Richie is convinced in his head, Richie's like, I think he probably actually could. So we don't know if that's just a fear that Richie has, or if like Pennywise has the ability to just give people diseases, or like with the librarian, did he actually give that woman a stroke, or was it just him taking credit? So
I think it is an open question because we don't know. Maybe he can do that.
I mean, how can you beat somebody who can just give you a heart attack if you walk towards him?
Yeah. And like, why isn't he killing them if that's the case? Like, why doesn't he just kill them all right away? So there's a lot. Yeah, it's like he wants to torment them.
I think it has something to do with the stuff that Mike's talking about, where Mike is saying that the cycle starts with something huge and then builds, and people are dying throughout, and then ends with another huge like death toll or something like that. So maybe he's trying to play them into a trap to where he can kill a bunch of them all together and kill a lot of people. But hopefully the Losers Club have something to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, so we also get talk about this like eye monster that he saw as a kid in a movie that everyone else thought was like really silly, but we learned that basically he has like a hang up about eyes because he used to wear glasses. Now he has contacts, and he starts getting this like eye pain, and his section actually ends with him like blinking out the contacts, but then he can't find them; they're just like gone. But yeah, we learned that there's this like tentacled eye monster that he's really afraid of, and when Pennywise is leaving, he says, "Oh, we have that monster down below the city," and like all that stuff. So
he's also telling all of them, when he's encountering all of them on their walks, he's telling them to leave still. He's trying to scare them away, which is interesting because maybe he is afraid that they'll do what they did again. He's worried that they'll stop him again. But he keeps telling them all to leave. He told Ben to leave. He told Bev to leave, and Richie now to leave.
Yeah, I mean, but then he also does say like, "Come on down." Like it's like he does both. He tells them like, you should just run away, but then other times he'll be like, "Come on down. I have the monster down here," and all this stuff. So it's like he's trying to put on a front that he's not worried, but maybe he is worried. Okay, so next we get Bill, who he goes to the sewer and basically challenges Pennywise. He basically says, "Come on out down, into the sewer grate." And as he's doing that, this like kid with a skateboard sees him, and there's this interesting interaction he has with this kid, where he asks if he can like borrow his skateboard, and we get an idea that he sees this kid's skateboard like he once saw Silver, his bike, that he would use to escape, and he thinks it's like this tie to childhood and maybe the freedom of childhood. And he also gives the boy a lot of advice about how he needs to like stay away from the sewers and stay away from the barrens. We get a part where the boy says that his friend claims to have seen the shark from Jaws in the barrens, and like he doesn't believe it, but then Bill's like, stay away from the barrens. So it's clear that like Bill believes it, and I just thought that would have been really interesting, like to see a giant shark. I don't know.
Yeah, he doesn't discriminate based on decade. He's ready for whatever pop cultural scares come along. He's like Jaws, got him. Freddy, got him. Jason, got him. So I'm sure he's terrifying all kinds of kids throughout the 80s with stuff like that.
Yeah, which just makes me like want there to be another 27 years go by and see like maybe we'll get that in the second movie or something.
Yeah, isn't that just like, Stranger Things though? Isn't Stranger Things 27 years later?
Yeah, but that's still the 80s. Like, what would it do in modern day? I feel like we could probably spend 20 minutes talking about that, but like modern day scares, oh boy. All right, so instead of getting into that, let's just keep moving. He eventually meets this other kid who is carrying a doll, and she tells him about a secondhand clothes store, which he goes to, and then he finds his old bike is in the window, and he decides he's going to buy it. And once he buys it, he feels like it lessens his stutter some. And calls up Mike Hanlon and finds out if he can leave the bike at his house. Mike kind of says, okay, sure, and intuits that it's silver, not just any old bike. And he leaves the store and he goes up to Mike's place, and he fixes it up in the garage. And then they kind of a weird moment, like a deck of cards falls on the ground and only 2 ace of spades pop up from like 2 different decks, and they're both like, "How is this even possible?" And he picks up those cards and he puts them in the spokes of the bike like he did when he was a kid. He also remembers this phrase, and the phrase I have it written here. Where is it? Here it is. He thrusts his fists against the posts and still insists he sees the ghosts. It's a hard phrase to say. There's a lot of S sounds in there. And he mentions it to Mike, and Mike tells him that it's like a really old phrase that has been used for a long time, but for people who have like stutters or lisps to like work on their voices, right? And it's something that Eddie used to try and say as a kid, but he could never say it. But then he has a memory where he says, I do remember that I said it once, but I can't remember what the situation was or why I did. So, first off, what did you make of that? And second off, I think before we record every episode, we should begin by just like saying that phrase.
We should just chant it together.
Yeah, just like just keep chanting it over and over until we're ready.
I'm sure that everyone loved that.
We don't have to record it. Just I think we should just make it a ritual.
I think we need to be transparent about this. I think we record it and we force our listeners to have 5 minutes of
us just repeating it over and over again.
Post.
Yeah, I want to hear you say it because it's hard.
Say it one more time so I know it.
He thrusts his fists against the posts and still insists he sees the ghosts.
He thrusts his fists against the post and still insists he sees the ghost.
Oh, you did it better than me. Like I feel like I struggle with it more than you did.
I was like I'm gonna mess this up. So I'm glad that I nailed it. I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think it'll come to be something that they taunt. That maybe it's something they chant at it or Pennywise to keep him at bay. Maybe it's something to do with the fact that it's such an old phrase. Maybe it's something that has to do with Pennywise backstory. Maybe it means something to him. Mike knowing everything and like predicting all of these things happening is I don't know, shocking. Like how could he have possibly known that Bill was going to buy this bike again, and then it was going to be silver, and then he was going to need the cards to put on the spokes.
I did want to ask you what you thought of this is the only chapter where we don't get this big Pennywise presence. He doesn't come up and do something to taunt Bill.
I think maybe because Bill went to the sewer to taunt him, and like I think if you want him to show up, he's less likely to show up. Maybe that's at play here. Something that I wanted to say was that when Richie was being attacked, he mentioned how funny it would be if he ended up in the hospital and how everybody would show up, and that they had all shown up to see Eddie because Eddie was in the hospital with a broken arm. So I think that we're going to get a scene where Eddie breaks his arm and he's in the hospital for some reason when they're trying to fight it when they were kids. Just wanted to mention that. It was something that was kind of thrown in there.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I guess we'll keep an eye out for that. All right, so next up we got Chapter 12, and that is Henry Bowers. And we learn that he is in a mental facility, and he can see the moon talking to him. And he hears Victor and Belch like talking to him from the moon. He also hears the different members of the Losers Club, like taunting him. And we learned that he, back in the after the events of what happened in 1958, he confessed to murdering he confessed to a bunch of the murders, and essentially went to this mental facility. Also, he killed his father, and he's in this mental facility because basically for the criminally insane. And there's a bunch of like other criminally insane people around him, and we learned about this really abusive one of the abusive guards, who I thought, so his name's Koontz, which Dean Koontz and Stephen King are like contemporary horror writers with one another, so I thought it was really interesting that there's a character named Koontz in a Stephen King novel. I don't know, I couldn't find anything on the internet about it when I googled it, but I wonder if that was like some sort of shot he was taking at him or what that was.
You think he's taking a shot, or do you think they're buddies?
Well, I know that they're often pitted against each other. I can't say whether or not they're friends, but I haven't heard that. And in fact, one thing I did read online was that King said that he thought many of the novels were crappy. many of Koontz novels were crappy.
Oh wow! So
something like that, like, or poorly written or something. Like there was something, I can't remember the exact quote, and I should have written it down. But yeah, it was something about. Yeah, I don't think King is a huge Koontz fan, so. I don't know. I don't know if that was on purpose or a complete accident. It's like a weird enough name where I'm like, it feels like it had to have been on purpose.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
How did you feel about getting Henry Bauer's point of view?
I did not expect that. That's what we were in Henry Bauer's point of view, and I was like, this is definitely going to be some sort of situation that the Losers Club have to deal with as adults, because it's, it's the 80s, and why would we even shoot to him unless he's going to be a factor?
So you thought we were done with him as adults, at least?
Kind of, yeah. I thought that maybe he had died from Pennywise or something when they were kids. So when we got Henry Bowers, I was like, okay, so he's gonna come and like throw a monkey wrench in their plans, probably. Something that we learn is that he's hoeing the ground, and we learn that he confessed to those murders under duress. So he had been getting beaten up by the cops, and they were kind of putting it all on him. I think he said he did kill his dad, but then also confess to the other ones because someone had to take responsibility for the other murders that had been happening, so it might as well be him.
Yeah. And he kind of got framed by Pennywise, it sounded like.
Yeah.
Maybe?
Because he keeps talking about how he doesn't want to mention this other factor or this other person that was some sort of influencer, was telling him to do certain things.
Yeah. And we also learned that the two other bullies died down in the sewers. And specifically, Victor got his head ripped off by Frankenstein's monster.
Universal?
And yeah, there you go. You're right. You're right on it.
Universal horror monsters, they're everywhere. I think that I mean, they were huge in the 50s, so I'm sure Stephen King's that was probably his favorite movies growing up.
Probably. And so we get the ghost of Victor coming out from under his bed, and he's got his head sewn back on. This is Victor as a child, not as an adult. And they kind of say, you got to come back. And then Victor's ghost basically transforms into this like 8-foot tall dog, like literally like a giant Doberman Pinscher wearing a clown suit. And when the guard Koontz comes in, it like gets him. And so I think he gets killed. We don't really get a confirmation of it, but it seems like maybe King is killing off Koontz here. So it's another thing to keep in mind.
Drama. Lots of drama going on. I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. I would think that he would be more humble than that, though, right? Like, I guess if he genuinely doesn't like him, that would kill him off, but...
Yeah, and it's interesting because like this is actually a fairly early on novel for King, I believe. I'm not super up on it, but he was popular, but he wasn't necessarily cemented. He hadn't cemented his legacy yet, like he did in over the next decade, as being like the best of all time. And I think especially at the time there was a lot of debate between him and Koontz. So it was like his direct competitor almost. I don't know. I would be really interested to hear more about that, but right now I'm just reading between the lines.
We can ask Stephen King when he comes on the podcast, right?
That's right. Yeah.
I'll write that down so that just in case,
I'll save the date. So next we get Kay, who is Bev's friend, and we've learned that she's all beat up, and she's at this like hospital getting treated, and she kind of goes back and tells the story about how Tom Rogan came to her house, like forced his way inside of her place, and just like beats the shit out of her, demanding to know where Bev is. And finally she cracks because, Tom's out of control. He's threatening to kill her. He's got broken glass. He's going to, like, cut her face up. And she just can't, like, she really, like, holds on for a while, but eventually she cracks and just reveals to Tom that Bev is in Derry. And then Tom kind of, like, storms away, and she's so scared that she doesn't even call the police. Tom basically threatens her that if she calls the police, he's going to, like, make bail and come back and kill her. And we really can see, like, it's a sign, I think, that it's not just, like, Bev isn't alone, like, that Tom is just a genuinely scary, out of control dude.
This is kind of a touchy subject because we have this woman, Kay, who was all for Bev leaving Tom, and she was so happy that she finally stood up, and she felt like it took her too long to get out of that abusive relationship. And then when Kay comes face to face with it, she sees that how difficult it truly is because she's dealing with Tom beats her, and then she sees that it's like a fear tactic. He's like I will kill you if you tell anyone, and that's probably the kinds of things that women who are battered have to deal with. And people say like they should just leave. If you're not in that situation, you don't know how hard it could be. There can be other factors, and then now Kay's face to face with it, and it's just tougher. It's tougher to do than to just say.
I think you hit the nail on the head. That I had that same thought, that this is King highlighting how easy it can be for someone who's on the outside to look at a situation and go, oh, why don't you just leave his ass, and when she's faced with the reality that Bev's been living with, it's a whole different story. And it's just like you never know what the situation is truly like on the inside. And it's never as simple as it seems. So then, speaking of Tom Rogan, he's next. And we get him on a plane, and he's looking at one of Bill's books, and he finds out who Bill's wife is, Audra Phillips. And he gets off the plane, and he's in Maine, and he gets like basically a car that has like stolen plates on it. And he drives he's driving towards Derry. So much like getting Henry Bowers' point of view, we get Tom Rogan's point of view, and he's also on his way to Derry. So what did you think about that? We got Henry and we got Tom, both heading there now.
So the section was tough for me to get through because the chapter I think is called 3 unwanted visits.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
So we're getting 3 visits from characters that we don't necessarily either want to hear from, didn't know what they were up to, or didn't want them to be getting into those situations. And so we get Henry Bowers is still alive, and he's going to be affecting the Losers Club's plans from here on out, I'm sure. And then we get Tom, and Tom lands in Derry, or not in Derry. I guess he lands in Boston.
Bangor.
Okay, Bangor. And then he gets a car, and he's headed to Derry.
Maybe it was Boston. It was something pretty close.
And then the next chapter, or the next section of this chapter that we get into, is also a character that we don't necessarily want to be doing what they're doing.
Yeah, it's Audra. She decides to leave and follow Bill, and so she is kind of the exception in that she's not murderous like the other two. But she's come to find out, like, to come to Bill, and she's an outsider who is heading into Derry, so I think we're immediately a little bit worried about her, right? And
right.
then in some sort of serendipitous, or the opposite of that, moment, she stays at the same hotel as Tom, and we're left knowing that they've parked their cars, like, nose to nose, without even knowing it. And that's where it leaves that part, and we get into Interlude 3.
The reason that I say it was tough to get through is just because you're watching obstacles form themselves for the Losers Club in the future, or potential pawns in some sort of game that Pennywise can use now, because he's getting stronger based on the decision. And Audra didn't even realize really why she wanted to go. She just knew that something was compelling her to go. So I think that it is influencing these connections, these things that are coming together, so that he has more firepower.
I think there's a lot in Henry Bauer's section that supports that, because we get literally Pennywise talking to him and saying, "You need to come back. I need your help," or not. I need your help, but he's like, "You need to come back." And he does say something curious about how it seems like there's a limitation to what it can do based off of how much the person he's affecting believes in what's going on. And he said to Henry, like, it doesn't matter if they believe in you. You can still get to them because you're like real, essentially. So it's interesting. It's like Henry presents him a pawn, like you said, that he can maybe use in a way that he wouldn't otherwise with his like conjurings that he seems to do.
And the fact that Tom and Audra are so close together just leads me to believe that he can start to influence, Pennywise can start to influence Tom, and then some sort, because I think in Tom's POV we even hear him say like, if Bill Denbrough needs to be taught a lesson, I'll do that too. And he learns who Audra is from the book. So they're very in close proximity. So it's just leading to a situation where Audra could be used as like either bait or like some sort of like an obstacle for them in the future. I don't know exactly how she'll be used, but and then Tom is obviously another wild card who's coming into the mix.
Yeah. I mean, and I think the one more interesting thing about Tom is that he doesn't appear to have been summoned by Pennywise. He just is coming on his own. Like, he doesn't have a talking moon telling him he needs to come back, you know. He's going on his own. So it's like, yeah, I don't know. Did you draw any comparisons or I mean, him versus Henry Bowers, like, what did you think about that? Like, are they cut from the same cloth? Like, I don't know.
Like I've said before, I think that it preys on like the evils of people as well as the fears. So like if somebody's there, he kind of gives them a push. And if they're going to do something, he will like influence it or push them over the edge. So I think that there's something to be said for like Henry being a loose cannon, and then Tom also being kind of, you know, he's obviously on his way to try to get Bev back. And then if anybody gets in his way, he's going to deal with them as well. So any kind of push will put him over the edge too.
Yeah. Him with like Pennywise pushing him is a scary prospect. Okay, so next up we get Interlude 3. This is the final part for this section, and it's Mike Hanlon learning about what happened to the Bradley gang. Basically, the town forms a militia when they learn that this gang is going to buy ammunition, and like 60 different guys show up with their like hunting rifles and shotguns and pistols and all this stuff, and they like ambush these people, this gang of criminals, and basically just execute them right in the middle of town. And it goes on for like 5 minutes, and just it's like 60 people just shooting every round of ammunition they have essentially into these 2 cars, and it's brutal. And we hear about like 1 or 2 of them, like especially some of the women, are trying to surrender even in the middle of it, and they just get cut down. And then we learn that the next day, the newspaper publishes that there was a shootout between police and the Bradley gang, and essentially the whole thing gets swept under the rug. And the final bit we learn is that a bunch of the people who were there individually saw a clown also shooting at the car, and using whatever gun the person who saw the clown was using. That's what they saw the clown using.
I think that the interludes are showing us parts of Derry's history that's important for us to know. Like this was, I think it's stated that this is the big conflict or the big like death toll that ends this
started it. This started the 1930s that ended in the death at the Black Spot.
Oh, okay, yeah. So so it's either the beginning or the end. There's something huge that happened. So this was the beginning of it. And I think that there's something to be said for the fact that adults in this town seem to have like they seem to be irrational sometimes. Like you're saying, there was women that were trying to surrender, and they just got this bloodlust, and they were just killing and killing and killing. And I think that had to do with its influence on the adults. And it seems like the adults in the town, no matter what decade, are just kind of oblivious to a lot of the clues and things that are going on, and the kids are pretty perceptive to it. And maybe because they dealt with it as kids, the Losers Club is still able to see Pennywise and see some of the things that he's doing. The shooting was interesting because, like you were saying, each person was holding a certain gun, and then if they saw the clown, he was holding that same gun. I think that just has to do with it giving people personalized fears, or not necessarily fears, but visions. I think it has something to do with the fact that like they all remember it differently, so it kind of discredits anything that they say.
It's almost like some sort of like funhouse mirror effect too. Like he's like mimicking them and delighting in it, and it seems like he kind of loves this kind of stuff.
Something that I was thinking about that we could talk about is that the fact that with this huge shootout, tons of people died. And I think they say that Georgie was the beginning of the 1950, 56, 58?
58.
So the 1958 killing started because of Georgie, and was Georgie's death that significant that he was the beginning of it? Like how do you compare a whole town of people killing like a group of people and then one kid dying? I don't know how the cycle is.
Yeah. It doesn't seem, maybe it's not just about the number of lives, but maybe something about the magnitude of it or the viciousness of it.
Well, we know Georgie, like it started because Georgie kind of listened to the clown and like sat there, and maybe it's just that a similar situation happened. Maybe the clown popped up before they killed the gang, and somebody just bought into it, and then it kind of brought him to life because they believed that there was a clown in the crowd who was shooting with them.
Yeah. Okay, so that ends this part, and I'm excited to say we actually have our first bit of feedback. Full disclosure: this is from Caitlin, and we know her in real life, but we're very glad that she sent in this bit of feedback. So I'm going to go ahead and read it. She says, "You guys told us about dreams of turtles and turtle wax. Any chance we could get a quick summary of all the turtle mentioned so far? And maybe we could each give our theories about what those turtle references mean." I don't know if we want to actually summarize them all, but we've seen little things here and there, and I think there might be this implication that we're like leaving a lot of it out, but we're not. Like, there's really not much described. It's very brief, like mention turtle, and it's like a throwaway almost. But I know more about the turtle. I'm much more interested in what you think about this stuff.
Yeah, I'll speak to it a little bit. So it's definitely shown up a lot. And even from the first instance that it showed up, I thought that it's not jarring, isn't the right word for it, but it stood out to me. So it was something where I was like, this is important. This is something that's going to probably show back up again. And I think the first time was just when Georgie was going into the basement, he saw the turtle, in reference to the fact that he went to the basement and thought there were creatures down there, and then the turtle was some sort of like light at the end of the tunnel. He like saw it, and that's what he became fixated on, rather than being so scared of what was going on in the basement. At least that's
what do you think the turtle is?
I don't know. See, that's the crazy part, is that we're halfway through the book, and I don't know that I can really. It's got to be, because I don't know what it is either, so I can't really draw any parallels. I can't, like, it's a spirit.
Does it seem to be a force for good?
Yeah, it absolutely is that. It's definitely, that's definitely something that as we see it more and more, we realize there's something said about how some force helps Mike throw the tile at that giant bird. There is a mention of, I think Ben walked out of the library in this section here, or in part 3 that we're on now. Mm-hmm. When he walks out, he looks down at the pavement and he sees the turtle for a second, and then realizes that it's just some hopscotch thing that's kind of started to fade away that looked like a turtle.
That's right.
So there was a few times that it's just brought up, and every time, and I think Ben, what was the word that Ben said? He thought of the turtle and he said a word.
I think it's chud or should. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, so
CHUD.
There's these words that keep popping up, and there's actually one more that I wanted to mention. I don't know if this has to do with the turtle, but when Bev was scared and she was running out of the gingerbread house, the Hansel and Gretel house, she turns back to it and she says that someone knows your real name. So Bev says that Grackles knows his real name, and that affects him negatively. Like he kind of shrinks back at the mention of that. So I don't know if that's turtle related or not, but that's another thing that I should have mentioned back in Bev's section. So it's definitely a force for good. It shows up kind of when the characters are needing some sort of sign or some sort of like helpful hand, it seems like. Maybe it's just like the spirit of Derry fighting back against Pennywise the clown's evil ways.
Yeah, it's some sort of force. Like I said, I don't want to go into it, but I do think we've pretty accurately talked about what has happened so far, and that it's not much, and that it's very vague.
The turtle, I'm excited to find out more about it, because at the mention of it, basically the things that I know about it right now are it's a force for good, it helps the characters out sometimes, and it seems to show up. None of them really remember it. So we as the reader don't know it very well either.
Yeah, so I guess that's the end of part 3.
Thank you for that feedback, by the way. Any feedback that anybody wants to send, we would love to interact and talk back to you guys about it.
Yeah, and we might read it on the air like we did with this one. Yeah, thanks a lot. You can get in contact with us either through our email, which is inktofilm@gmail.com, or you can reach out on Facebook or Twitter. And hey, I just got our Instagram up, which is also inktofilm. Yeah, we're all over social media, full court press.
We're also going to be on Google Play Music here very, very soon. So Android users, be ready to listen. We should be able to get all of the episodes up on there.
And on some other platforms we're looking to expand out to. That's true. I'm excited about that. I'm sure I'll post some stuff on social media about that so that people can find it. But yeah, I enjoyed talking about that part. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to it, and I hope you'll come back for part 4 of 5 as we start to get into the home stretch here for the novel.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time. Getting closer and closer to that film, and I think we're almost close to nailing down our next project too. So keep your eyes out for that, just in case it hasn't been exactly the project that the novel or film that you were that interested in.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say we will announce our next project in the next episode. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. All right, see you next time.